Hey Patrick,
Hey, how's it going, Joe?
what's up, man?
Not much. Just getting going. How about
I, li-
you?
I like it. Everything's good. Sun, it's getting ready to heat up. We can cook eggs on the sidewalk today.
Oh, wow. It's a little chilly here in New York, actually. It's
Is it?
not too bad. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we it gets hard here in Kansas City with the heat, but this has been a different creature. Like I love the heat.
Mm,
I'm part cat, but when you walk outside in the morning, you're like, what?
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. So,
Yeah.
but let's talk about something else. Let's get into the jazz. Nice to meet you. Thanks for taking a minute out.
Sure thing. Good to meet you too. Good to be on the
So
show.
I've already played you all on the show. I really like what you guys do, and it's kind of emblematic. I remember in the 90s when I was getting into jazz in the late 90s with Squirrel Nut Zippers, and
Hmm.
they were kind of reinfusing that notion of dance and getting kind of jazz to where it was when, the swinging 20s were around. And I see a lot of what you guys are doing that's a part of that. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, what it feels like to have this album come out now.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's been great. It was a ton of work because I produced it, I recorded it, I'm also the band leader. But it's been really wonderful to have it out because the band has been playing for kind of a lot lately, but the because of the pandemic, the album was really delayed in being released. So to finally have something out there is great. It's interesting what you were saying about the kind of like the 90s swing bands and stuff like that, because it's there's a similarity, but there's also kind of significant difference. The A lot of the bands in the 90s were kind of coming out of the ska scene, which was
Yeah.
interesting, and they were kind of doing a little bit more of like a theatrical zoot suit kind of thing. And uh so it got really popular, which was fantastic, and it definitely was a huge part of the swing resurgence that happened. But I think what's changed since then, especially in the last like 5 to 10 years, and I'm speaking at this because I also produce a ton of swing events here in New York City, is that a lot of the bands are playing a little bit more, I guess for lack of a better term, authentic. Like they're playing more to the roots of the music. So they're kind of coming in with a lot of knowledge and expertise and love of the music. They're sort of not coming from sort of this other scene to come in. So we have like the musicians that we pull from are amazing, and that's one of the things on the album that was incredible, is having just so much talent to pull from. So, it's like when we play, we'll wear a suit and a tie or some little vintage, touch, but it's not like we're wearing zoot suits and kind of putting on that type of theatrical thing. So it's interesting. We're really connected in New York City to the dance scene since, Lindy Hop comes from New York City. We kind of take a certain pride in all of that and kind of connecting the two together. And then doing our own twist to it. So I'm sure as you heard, it's, we're not doing recreations of tunes from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s. We're sort of putting our own little spin on it. And it's been really great.
Yeah, well, and that's the refreshing part. And it's great you made that distinction because I think at the end of the day, it's really the heart and soul and spirit of this is to get people to believe that jazz isn't kind of this stuffy older person kind of a thing. You know what I'm saying? It
Yeah.
gets pigeonholed as highbrow and kind of unapproachable in that matter. But when you do actually go to an event, I know they've had them here in Kansas City where people are doing dances and they're getting into it. There's a different vibe, there's a feel to it. It kind of goes back to that 18th and Vine thing where people were
Mhm.
just out enjoying having a drink and kicking their feet up. That's what the practitioners of this art wanted. That's what Duke and all of them wanted.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think of jazz as sort of like a concert format where you sit and you listen, and or you go to a jazz club and it's like really expensive, and it's sort of people don't quite understand it and stuff like that. But I mean, I think because we're also playing more of the traditional styles, it's kind of just party music in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of the origins of the music were meant for dancing. It was all the swing clubs in Harlem in the swing era. I mean, that was music that just made you want to dance. So I think because we're playing environment here in the city. I mean, of course, jumping forward many decades later, but I mean, part of what I like to bring to it is, connecting to listeners and dancers. And, it's like we have a weekly gig that we play at Somewhere Nowhere, and we're there every Wednesday. August is supposed to be kind of a slow month. Like last night, we had only 290 people there. The last 3 weeks before, we had over 400 people. And, maybe a 25 to 30% of them are swing dancers. Everyone else are just kind of like 20, 30 somethings that are just curious to check it out. They're these jazz curious people, as I call them. They just kind of show up and they kind of like bop around and they're hanging out with their friends. And I think it's, and I like being able to introduce people to this other side of jazz. It's fun. You can, it's a social music for dancing, for hanging out, for flirting, for doing whatever you do with it. And it's I'm glad to hear you guys connecting with it.
Well, that's the roots of it too. That's just what you said. Those last caveats are the roots of why this music took hold and became the big modern music of the time. So I'm curious with the Hot Toddies, how did you all kind of gravitate and come into orbit together? And how did it culminate to this first full-length release?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I run Prohibition Productions here in New York City, which is a production company that produces hot jazz and swing dance events. So I've been doing that for a while. My first party in the public was 2006. These started as house parties. They got too big. I started doing them outside. And so it kind of came from producing these events. I grew up as a drummer, and then I actually stopped when I went to college. I went to conservatory for classical composing. So I kind of went classical. I wrote ballets and operas and stuff like that. And all the while I was producing these swing events kind of as a side hustle. And then over time they became a real business. And, I work with most of the bands here in the city that play hot jazz and swing. And after time, I really just started missing playing. When you're improvising in a jazz band, it's a much more in the moment kind of thing, where composing is more cerebral and you're just kind of like, you're in your head a little bit. And then I was asked to, I don't know if you know Bria Skomberg, the wonderful trumpet player. And she put together a adult jazz camp called the New York Hot Jazz Camp. And she asked me to help promote it with Molly Ryan. The two of them are running it. And I said, well, instead of paying me, can I just take the camp? And I did that. And when I was there, I met Gabe Terracciano, who was the co-band leader with me, a very fine violin player, Grammy nominated just last year, was playing with Terrence Blanchard and the Turtle Island String Quartet. But at the time, he was new to hot jazz. So we were put in a camp band together, and we kind of connected. And then as we finished the camp, we started going to some of my events, and we were like, hey, maybe we should, put something together, because we sort of connected. And then, it took a little bit of time for that to happen, but then we started pulling together a lot of the musicians that I knew from the bands that I was hiring. Because here in New York, as in most places, musicians play with many different bands. And so we just had to find the right people. And over time that came together. So I would say about a year after we started playing together, we started recording. So we had our first couple of sessions for this album in 2019, but then the pandemic hit. It kind of got put on the back burner. We did our quarantine EP tracks, which we recorded separately during pandemic, put that out in 21. And then last year we kind of got back together working on this project, did 2 more sessions, and then, started mixing everything. So it was quite a journey, and it kind of tracks a journey of the band as well, and figuring itself out.
Yeah. So what was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away, that inspired you to want to do it?
Ooh, interesting question. So my dad is a photographer, and he grew up loving jazz. My mom as well. And but I remember I remember him. Well, I remember two things. I remember him taking us to the Blue Note when we were maybe in junior high school, and just it being quite an experience. Um, I think Herbie Mann was playing because my dad shot a cover for Herbie Mann in one of his albums in the 70s. I think it was the Brazil album. And then I remember he took us up to Harlem. I think it was Harlem School of the Arts. And there was some kind of like session with some of the old jazz greats, and Max Roach was there, and he was playing, and he did this thing on the hi-hat, just by itself. I remember that being really inspiring. And then there was Animal from the Muppets as a kid. I remember loving that. um and but yeah, I mean, I think those were some pretty early, and then just always hearing jazz at home. um yeah, and then in terms of the first time I saw swing dancing, I have an identical twin brother, and he started dancing a couple years before I did. But the first time I saw him do it, he'd been telling me about this for a long time, and there's a pretty big scene here in New York. And I remember going to this place called Louisiana Bar and Grill, and walking into the room, there was a band playing, and there's something like the room was packed with like 150 people playing. There's a band playing, all these people dancing, and it just kind of blew me away. And I was like, oh, this is why you're really into this. So it kind of connected all these different worlds together.
So of all of these things, these strings that you pull on this jazz marionette, what do you like the best about what you do? What do you look forward to the most every day?
Um, I mean, I love bringing people together. I think that's kind of when I kind of fell into producing the events. I like being able to put live music and people together. It's kind of like cooking or chemistry. You sort of like put all these different things together, and things happen. And as I got back into playing, and now it's become a very regular part of my life. I mean, I love being playing on the drums, connecting with your musicians, and then seeing the effect that has on everyone. Like you kind of, if you do it right, it's almost like people can't help but dance or move or physicalize the music in some way. And I think that's it's just a really wonderful, magical thing. And I think that's something the band does extremely well. I mean, like, we do it with charts. We're very much in the moment, connecting with each other. And I think the way that I try and play is to kind of really, um, create a rhythm section that has that driving dance to it, and make people dance.
Yeah, well, so ultimately, this is this is your first big release, and I'm curious, what are you hoping the listener ultimately gets, not only from this album, but just the overall vibe of what the Hot Toddies are and what they're doing?
Um, well, I mean, I think part of the goal was to make something that was danceable for people that are swing dancers, Lindy Hoppers, things like that. On the album, uh, uh, credits on the back, the tracks, we list the BPM, which is very common dancers. So it's like there's all these little things in there that are meant to cater to dancers. The tempo ranges, the song lengths, things like that. But we're not just playing for dancers. So I think part of what we do is try and create music that's going to be appealing for jazz fans, for people that just want to listen, loungers, things like that. So there's even like, while the tempos might not be all over the, like, it's kind of not a it's kind of like a narrow tempo range, right? And the song lengths aren't that long, but there's a lot of complexity happening within there that's based on the improvisation that's happening. So it's sort of like um simply complex in a lot of ways. And so I think it's something that you can really just listen to, but you can also dance to it. And I think that's important. I think one of the things that we developed over the last year doing this weekly residency at Somewhere Nowhere is, how do you connect to dancers and non-dancers and just people wanting to enjoy it? And there's a way to do that, and I think it's really important. I mean, we played Lincoln Center's Summer for the City last month, which is sort of like the big outdoor swing dance. It used to be called Midsummer Night's Swing. A lot of us fell in love with dancing there. over the years. And it was interesting when we played the first set. There weren't a lot of dancers out yet. But there was a ton. I mean, there was over 2,000 people at this event. And what was interesting is there was a lot of people just listening and kind of, getting into it. And then the dancers, of course, came out, and it was great. But a lot of people said, "Oh, yeah, you guys put on a good show," and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting, because we're not trying to put on a show, we're just playing." But because our noses aren't in the music, and we're really, um, connecting with each other, I think that just kind of happens naturally.
Yeah.
So I think that's something which opens us up to doing concerts instead of just dances,
Yeah.
and mixing it up.
The one thing I think there was a fear when the pandemic was really raging was that there was going to be a lot of kids in school that were not going to go for jazz. People were leaving
Mhm.
big cities like New York. There was this
Mhm.
thing where people had to be pragmatic and real about rent costs and living and what they're going to do. And there was a lot of people that became truck drivers that were musicians. But it seems to me as though, especially with what you're doing, your project and getting people moving, is that there is a bigger resurgence in jazz now than there maybe was before. It
Hmm.
seems as strong as ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, look, like everywhere, New York City was hit really hard. We lost a lot of people moved out, a lot of musicians moved away. Some of them came back, some of them didn't. Um, a lot of dancers that we knew that used to come to the events moved away. There's a whole lot of new people coming in. So it's interesting. It's a real inflection point. A lot of things changed, and there's a lot of new people here. And I think it's been tricky, because like when you're kind of in the moment, it is scary that there's, for the first, I mean, it's hard to say when pandemic ended, but like we started our Wednesday weekly um a year ago in May, actually May the 4th, ironically. But you know 21, there wasn't really anything happening. In 22, it started very slowly. But people were still nervous coming out, especially here in the city, because it's also tightly packed, and a lot of old places don't have good ventilation. And but it's really been gradually coming back. I think one of the things that we felt immediately when we started doing some of the larger events, when people felt more safe to go out, is this people missing the social connection and interaction of not only getting together at an event, but the whole point of swing dancing, it's a social dance, right? And I think that's um really important. And what we're seeing is a lot of new people coming in. Like, I think these jazz curious people that show up at the club, like hundreds of them every week, they kind of don't know too much about what swing is, and jazz, and the history, and swing dancing and stuff like that, but they're curious. Like, they see it on Instagram, they want to check it out. So I think in the big picture, we're seeing a whole shift happening, and a lot of new people coming in. And I think we're starting to get really optimistic. I feel like this fall is going to be really busy. I think it's going to be the first sort of new normal time coming out of pandemic. And I think we're going to get a lot busier. And it's been quite a journey, as I'm sure it has been for you all.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. My next question comes from this. Robert Altman came to Kansas City in 95. He's from here, and he was making that film with Jennifer Jason Leigh called Kansas City. And they redid 18th and Vine. It was all the old clubs, the Battle of the Bands, and it was all this
Mm.
nostalgia. So I started thinking, what act would I love to have seen live here in Kansas City? So I'm going to ask you that, as someone that's a practitioner of presenting this music and getting people moving. What nostalgic place would you go in a time machine? What act would you see? What venue would you go to really get that full bodied feel?
Hmm. I mean, one of the things I like to do when I'm exploring cities, or especially music cities, is just kind of find the street that has all the clubs on it, or just kind of wander through. Like, it's like when you walk through New Orleans, right? You're kind of walking through, you're experiencing the people and tourists, but you kind of go into, you kind of walk by and you hear music going into a club and you kind of go in. So imagine going back in the day and kind of going through, and it's like, you see all the street signs of like who's playing all these like amazing jazz greats and things like that. I mean, just to kind of do that would be, I think, really, really magical. I mean, Kansas City has amazing history, like so many other spots. It'd be really special to almost like accidentally stumble into these jazz greats just kind of doing their thing. It's like they don't quite realize that they're part of history that we're going to recognize down the road. They're just kind of there playing the gig, but making amazing music, you know.
It's interesting. I was talking to Chuck Israels about this at one point, and he played with everybody under the sun, and he had mentioned that. I apologize. I don't, can you hear that? Okay, good, 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 good. So we're siphoned here. Sorry. So, I was like, were you aware with Stan Getz that you guys were creating this thing that was just unbelievable? And he was like, no, man. I mean, we would run into Miles and all these guys, and they were just
Real.
doing their thing. There was no like thing that we're in the midst of this golden era of jazz. We were just doing what we were doing. And that's the interesting thing about it. So Patrick kind of is the brainchild of this band. I'm curious, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? And even in the context of this band, who do you think you are?
Hmm. Great question. Still figuring that out.
Yes.
But um, but in a lot of ways, releasing this album is starting to help to clarify that a little bit. I mean, I think, kind of getting into it, it was really just to play for dancers, to kind of, play some gigs here in the city. And I think what's really happening is it's like you hear about how bands come together and they become tight and they become like a family. Like I think that's really starting to happen. So I think in a lot of ways through the recording process we started to figure that out. So now there's, like Justin Poindexter on guitar. He's from North Carolina and he plays with Jazz Lincoln Center, and he's just like incredible musician. I mean, like him and Hannah Gill, one of our singers, that's the whole reason we got to playing Kansas City. um it's like, well, we're a swing band, we're playing a lot of standards, but then the DJ that I work with a lot, Andres Schmidt, he's a real deep listener to music, and he was like, you guys should play a jump blues tune, and I was like, huh, okay. I mean, that seems like a little outside of what, but hey, why not? And Hannah knew Kansas City, and so we the first time I think we played that, it was like you could just tell, like it kind of popped in the room. And there's something it's like that crossover between early rock and roll and swing and jump blues, and I think that helped push us in a different direction. So I feel like we're kind of in this zone where we're doing hot jazz and swing and a little jump blues, and it's kind of somewhere in the middle, and we have all these people with different um different ideas and characteristics that come into it. So we have, a lot of different subtle flavorings happening there, and I think it's really exciting because we're not doing just swing covers, um but we're kind of bringing a lot of different flavors together, and it's, sometimes it's a little bit of bluegrass, sometimes a little bit of Western swing, sometimes it's even a little bit of classical music. I mean, there's a lot of things in there. And I think that's really interesting because it's like I was saying earlier, it's some of the context is simple, but there's a lot of musical complexity coming in, and I like that. I want the band to be something that you can listen to and something that you can dance to, and it's not just meant for one thing. I think the idea of music, you kind of give it to everybody, and we want it to be open. Some bands are very like, oh, we only want this kind of person listening to it, and I don't think that's, even with jazz. Like I feel like if you do it well and there's enough energy in it, a lot of people who don't think they're going to be into it are going to really like it. And I think we're trying to find that common ground.
So if anyone wants to pick up the brand new album, they want to see you live, anything about the Hot Toddies world, where do they go?
So you can check out our website and social media and things like that. It's Toddies Band online, and hottoddies.band. And we're the Hot Toddies Jazz Band. There is a like alt rock girl group, I think, down south called Hot Toddies. Different. And then also on social media, Hot Toddies Jazz Band, Instagram, Facebook. The album is on all the major streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music. You can buy CDs and cassettes on Bandcamp. And we're playing mostly in New York City, but we're really hoping to get out on the road probably in later this year and in the spring. And we certainly love to come to Kansas City.
Yeah.
But you can actually, I have to say, we got a real kick when we were getting our the radio playlists coming in and seeing Kansas City at the top of a playlist in Kansas City. We're just like super excited about that. And yeah, so hopefully we'll be out there soon.
Yeah. I played Kansas City pretty quick after I got the CD in the mail. So yeah, you're king of the Kansas City Music Mountain. Good job. So hey, thank you for opening up. Thanks for opening up about this. I love what you guys do, so I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Well, it's great being on the show, and appreciate you and playing the music.